I'm sorry for the confusion. Could you please clarify what you'd like me to make larger? Are you referring to the video introduction I created earlier? If you'd like me to expand on that or create a longer version, I'd be happy to do so. Or if you have specific Portuguese text you'd like translated to American English, please share it so I can help you properly. The late September sun cast long shadows across the rolling fields of Jack Sullivan's farm in East Texas. At 62, Jack's weathered face told the story of decades working this land, inherited from his father before him. His calloused hands gripped the steering wheel of his faded blue Ford F-150 as he drove along the perimeter of his property, checking fences after the previous night's thunderstorm. Jack had lived alone since Martha passed 5 years ago. Their children had moved to cities, Dallas, Houston, and Austin, returning only for holidays and the occasional weekend. The farm that once bustled with life had grown quiet, save for the lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the cornfields. As he approached the old red barn that needed a fresh coat of paint, something caught his attention, a faint whimpering sound barely audible over the truck's engine. Jack cut the ignition and listened. There it was again, coming from behind the stack of hay bales near the barn's entrance. "Hello," Jack called out, reaching for the flashlight he kept in his glove compartment. The evening was drawing in, darkening the corners of the property. Following the sound, Jack rounded the hay bales and stopped short. There, huddled together in a soggy cardboard box marked "Free Puppies," were 6 small, trembling forms. They couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, their fur matted and damp from the rain. "Well, I'll be damned," Jack muttered, kneeling despite the protest from his right knee. One puppy, the smallest of the bunch with rusty-colored fur, looked up at him with pleading brown eyes and let out a pitiful whine. Jack looked around. The nearest house was 3 miles down the road. Someone had deliberately driven onto his property to abandon these animals. "Who would do such a thing?" he said aloud, anger rising in his chest. He reached into the box and gently lifted the rusty-colored pup, who trembled in his palm. "It's all right, little one. You're okay now." Jack's cell phone rang. It was Sam Reynolds, his neighbor and closest friend for 30 years. "Hey, Jack, you still coming by to watch the Rangers game tonight?" "Sam, I've got a situation here," Jack replied, explaining his discovery. "Just take him to the shelter in Pine Creek tomorrow," Sam advised. "That Thompson girl works there, you know, Bill's daughter. She'll make sure they find homes." Jack looked down at the 6 pairs of eyes now watching him. "The shelter's always overcrowded, Sam. You know what happens to most of these drop-offs." "Jack Sullivan, don't you even think about it," Sam warned, knowing his friend all too well. "You've got enough on your plate trying to keep that farm running with grain prices what they are. The last thing you need is 6 hungry mouths to feed." Jack sighed. "I'll figure something out. Rain check on that game." After hanging up, Jack carefully placed the box in the passenger seat of his truck. The rational part of his brain knew Sam was right. He barely made ends meet these days. Feed costs were up, and last year's drought had hit his savings hard. But as he drove back to the farmhouse, the smallest pup crawled out of the box and into his lap, curling up against his stomach. "Just temporary," Jack told himself firmly, glancing down at the sleeping puppy. "Just until I figure out something better for y'all." But deep down, Jack Sullivan knew he'd already made his decision the moment he'd lifted that first puppy from the box. Jack's farmhouse kitchen hadn't seen this much activity in years. He'd placed the cardboard box next to the old wood-burning stove and was now rummaging through his refrigerator, looking for something suitable for 6 hungry puppies. "Milk," he muttered, pulling out a half-empty gallon. "That'll work for now." He found a shallow baking dish and filled it with milk, then carefully placed it in the box. The puppies stumbled over each other, eager to drink. Jack watched them, his brow furrowed with concern. They were thin, too thin, and one of them, a black and white pup with a patch over one eye, seemed weaker than the others. The kitchen wall clock read 9:30 p.m. when Jack's phone rang again. "You didn't take them to the shelter, did you?" Sam's voice held a note of resignation. "It's too late now. They're closed," Jack replied, watching the puppies. "I'll figure it out tomorrow." "Jack, listen to me. This isn't like fixing a fence or mending a tractor. These animals need shots, food, training. That's money you don't have to spare." Jack sank into a chair at his kitchen table. "I know that, Sam. Pine Creek's animal control is overwhelmed as it is. Remember the Johnson place? 37 dogs they pulled out of there. The shelter's still dealing with that mess. After hanging up, Jack sat in silence, watching the puppies finally settle into sleep, huddled together for warmth. The rusty-colored pup had claimed a spot right in the center, protected by his siblings. The next morning, Jack drove into town for supplies, his truck rattling down Main Street past storefronts that had seen better days. Inside Pearson's general store, he grabbed a shopping cart. Dog food. He mumbled to himself, scanning the aisles until he found pet supplies. He threw in the largest bag they had, along with 6 small bowls and a book titled Puppy Care for Beginners. Emma Pearson, whose family had owned the store for generations, raised an eyebrow as she rang up his purchases. Starting a kennel, Jack? Found some abandoned puppies on my property, he explained. Emma nodded sympathetically. Happens too often around here. Ever since they closed that big factory in Millfield, people can't afford to keep their animals. She paused. You taking them to the shelter? Before Jack could answer, the bell above the door chimed as Tom Gallagher walked in. At 55, Tom owned the largest cattle operation in the county and never let anyone forget it. Sullivan, Tom acknowledged with a nod. Heard you've become a dog sitter. His tone made it clear what he thought of that development. Jack stiffened. News travels fast. Small town, Tom replied with a shrug. Though I gotta say, with corn prices what they are, I'd think you'd be focused on more important things than playing rescue ranger. Some things matter more than money, Tom. Jack replied evenly. Tom's laugh was short and dismissive. Tell that to the bank when they come calling for your mortgage payment. He picked up a newspaper from the counter. Anyway, my cousin works at that vet clinic over in Beaumont. Says they'll put those mutts down for $30 each. Save you the trouble. Jack felt his face flush with anger. I appreciate the tip, he said coldly, gathering his bags. As he loaded the supplies into his truck, Jack spotted the local animal shelter across the street. Through the glass front, he could see cages lined up against the walls, most containing dogs of various sizes. A sign on the door read, "At capacity, cannot accept new animals." Jack sat in his truck for a long moment, keys in hand. Sam was right. Tom was right. The rational decision would be to find another shelter, maybe in the next county. But when he finally started the engine, Jack turned toward home, towards 6 puppies who had no one else in the world looking out for them. $30 each to put them down, he muttered as he drove. What kind of world are we living in? 2 weeks passed in a blur of feeding schedules, makeshift beds, and countless trips outside for bathroom breaks. Jack had converted a corner of his barn into a puppy sanctuary, using old wooden pallets to create a secure pen lined with straw and blankets he'd found in the attic. A heat lamp hung overhead, casting a warm glow over the space as autumn nights grew chillier. Each puppy had revealed its personality, and Jack found himself giving them names almost without realizing it. The rusty-colored one, always first to greet him, became Rusty. The largest, a golden retriever mix with paws too big for his body, he called Duke. The only pup with long, flowing fur, likely part collie, was Bella. Then there was Charlie, the black and white one with the eye patch who'd been the weakest but was now thriving. A stubborn brown pup with a habit of howling at sunrise became Hank, and the smallest female with white markings on her paws was Molly. You're getting stronger every day, aren't you? Jack said one morning as he filled their bowls with puppy food soaked in warm water. The 6 tails wagged in unison as they dove into breakfast. Jack had taken to spending his evenings in the barn, sitting on an old rocking chair while the puppies played around his feet. Sometimes he'd read aloud from the newspaper, his voice filling the space that had been silent for too long. This particular evening, as October gave way to November, Sam's truck pulled up the gravel driveway. Jack heard the familiar rumble of the engine and stepped outside. "So this is where you've been hiding," Sam called, climbing out of his vehicle with a 6-pack of beer. "Haven't seen you at the diner in days." "Been busy," Jack replied, accepting a beer with a nod of thanks. Sam followed him into the barn and let out a low whistle when he saw the setup. "Well, I'll be. You've gone and built them a regular Taj Mahal." The puppies, now recognizing a new person, bounded over to investigate. Duke jumped up against Sam's legs, tail spinning like a propeller. "Down, Duke," Jack commanded, surprised when the pup immediately sat, looking up expectantly. "They're starting to listen. Watch this, Rusty, come." The rusty-colored pup trotted over immediately and sat at Jack's feet. Sam shook his head but couldn't hide his smile. "I've got to hand it to you, Jack. They look good. Healthy. Took them to Doc Wilson yesterday. Clean bill of health for all 6. He gave me a deal on their shots. Jack bent down to scratch Bella behind the ears. Still need to get them fixed when they're a bit older. That'll cost you. Worth every penny. Jack replied without hesitation. Sam took a long drink of his beer. You know what people in town are saying, right? Jack straightened up. I can imagine. Mary at the post office thinks you've gone soft in the head. Tom Gallagher told half the feed store you're wasting money that could save your farm. Jack's jaw tightened. Tom Gallagher can mind his own business. I'm just saying, Jack. People talk. Especially when a man who's lived alone for 5 years suddenly adopts 6 puppies. As if sensing the tension, Molly approached Jack and pressed against his leg. He reached down automatically to pet her. Look at them, Sam, Jack said quietly. 2 weeks ago, they were half-starved and scared. Now look. The puppies were engaged in an elaborate game of chase, tumbling over each other across the straw-covered floor, their barks and yips filling the barn with life. Sam watched for a long moment. Martha would have loved this, he finally said. Jack swallowed hard. Yeah, she would have. Later, after Sam left, Jack settled into the rocking chair with a worn photo album. He flipped to a picture of Martha kneeling in their garden, her smile radiant as she looked toward the camera, toward him. I think I'm finally waking up, he whispered to the photograph. Should have gotten a dog years ago, like you always wanted. As if in response, all 6 puppies suddenly abandoned their play and gathered at his feet, looking up with expectant eyes. All right, Jack chuckled, putting aside the album. Story time it is. And as darkness settled over the Texas farmland, the sound of Jack's voice reading from an old paperback novel drifted through the barn, punctuated by occasional happy yips from his newfound family. The Pine Creek Diner had been serving the same breakfast special for 30 years. 2 eggs, hash browns, bacon, and a biscuit with gravy for $5.99. Jack sat in his usual booth by the window, nursing a cup of black coffee while waiting for his food. It was the first time he'd been into town for anything other than supplies in nearly a month. Lucille, the 60-something waitress who'd been working there since Jack could remember, slid his plate in front of him. Well, look who decided to join the land of the living, she said with a wink. How are those pups of yours? Growing like weeds, Jack replied, picking up his fork. The vet says they're all mixed breeds, but they're smart as whips. Lucille nodded, refilling his coffee. My grandson Joey wants to come see them sometime. That boy loves anything with 4 legs. Jack had just opened his mouth to respond when a booming voice interrupted from across the diner. Sullivan, the dog whisperer himself, Tom Gallagher called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. He sat at the counter with 2 other local farmers, Dave Wilson and Frank Carter. Jack gave a tight nod and turned back to his breakfast. Hey Tom, I heard Jack's got those mutts answering the phone and doing his taxes now, Dave said, not bothering to lower his voice. Scattered laughter rippled through the diner. Jack kept his eyes on his plate. Careful now, Frank added. Next thing you know, he'll be letting them sleep in the house. Probably tuck them in with bedtime stories too. More laughter followed. Jack felt his neck grow hot, but he continued eating in silence. Tom slid off his stool and sauntered over to Jack's table. No offense, Sullivan, but don't you think your money could be better spent? Word around town is the bank's been sending you letters about that second mortgage. Jack looked up, his blue eyes hard. My finances aren't your concern, Tom. Just looking out for a neighbor, Tom replied with mock sincerity. Besides, what's the point? Those dogs won't herd cattle or guard property like proper farm dogs. They're just eating your food and taking up your time. Jack set down his fork. You done? Tom held up his hands in surrender, but his smirk remained. Just saying what everyone's thinking. Old Jack Sullivan, the crazy dog man. As Tom returned to his friends, Jack finished his breakfast quickly, left enough cash to cover the bill plus tip, and headed for the door. Don't mind them, Lucille said quietly as he passed the counter. Some folks just can't stand seeing someone do a good thing. Outside, Jack took a deep breath of the crisp November air. Main Street was decorated for the upcoming Thanksgiving festival, with paper turkeys and cornucopias in shop windows. He was heading toward the hardware store when he spotted Sarah Thompson, the veterinarian's daughter, coming out of the bookshop. Mr. Sullivan, she called, waving. At 25, Sarah had recently returned to Pine Creek after finishing vet school. Dad told me about your rescue mission. How are they doing? Growing faster than I expected, Jack admitted. The little one, Molly. She had me worried for a while, but she's keeping up with her brothers and sisters now. Sarah's face lit up. That's wonderful. I'd love to come by sometime. Maybe give you some pointers on training. From across the street, Jack heard someone call out. Better watch out, Sarah. Old man Sullivan might have you adopting the whole litter. Jack recognized Frank Carter's voice and saw him standing with several other men outside the barber shop, all of them chuckling. Sarah's smile faltered. I should get going, Jack said quietly. Thanks for the offer, though. Mr. Sullivan, Sarah called as he turned to leave. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is admirable. Not many people would take on that responsibility. Jack nodded his thanks, but the warmth of her words couldn't quite dispel the chill of the town's mockery. As he drove his truck back toward the farm, the radio played an old country song about loneliness and regret. Crazy dog man, he muttered to himself. Maybe they're right. But when he pulled up to the barn and heard the excited chorus of barks greeting his return, something in his chest loosened. He stepped inside to find 6 wagging tails and bright eyes focused entirely on him, as if his return was the most important event of their day. Well, hello to you too, he said, kneeling down to receive their enthusiastic welcome. At least somebody around here is happy to see me. December arrived with an unexpected cold snap that painted the Texas countryside with frost. Jack had spent the afternoon reinforcing the puppies area in the barn, adding extra blankets, and checking that the heat lamp was secure. Now approaching 12 weeks old, the dogs had nearly doubled in size, their playful energy seemingly boundless. All set for the night, Jack told them, making a final check of their water bowls. Duke nudged his hand, seeking attention. Yes, you too, big fella. He scratched behind the golden retriever's ears, smiling as the dog leaned into his touch. The weather forecast had predicted temperatures dropping into the 20s overnight, unusual for this part of Texas, even in winter. Jack made his final rounds of the property, checking on his small herd of cattle and making sure all equipment was properly stored. By 9 o'clock, exhaustion tugged at him. Jack settled into his recliner in the living room, a worn paperback in one hand and a glass of bourbon in the other. The house creaked and settled around him as the night grew colder. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the bare branches of the oak trees that lined his driveway. He must have dozed off because the next thing Jack knew, he was jolted awake by a sound that didn't belong. Metal against metal, followed by a muffled voice. The clock on the mantel read 2:17 a.m. Jack sat perfectly still, listening. There it was again, definitely movement outside, near his equipment shed. With the drought affecting crops across the county, farm equipment theft had been on the rise. The sheriff had sent out warnings just last week after the Hendersons lost a tractor and several tools worth thousands. Quietly, Jack moved to the window and peered out. In the dim moonlight, he could make out a pickup truck he didn't recognize parked at the far edge of his property, headlights off. 2 shadowy figures moved near his shed, while a third appeared to be heading toward the barn. Damn it, Jack muttered, moving quickly to his bedroom. He pulled his shotgun from the cabinet, loaded it, and grabbed his cell phone. His hands shook slightly as he dialed 911, reporting the intruders in a hushed voice. Officers are spread thin tonight, Mr. Sullivan, the dispatcher told him. It'll be at least 20 minutes before someone can get to you. 20 minutes was plenty of time for the thieves to take what they wanted and disappear. Jack ended the call and moved toward the back door, intending to fire a warning shot to scare them off. But before he could step outside, a cacophony of barking erupted from the barn. The puppies, who normally slept soundly through the night, were raising an alarm unlike anything Jack had heard from them before. Through the window, Jack saw the thief who'd been approaching the barn suddenly freeze, caught in the overwhelming chorus of barks. The man turned, looking back toward his companions, who had also stopped their work at the shed. Inside the house, Jack felt his heart pounding. He watched as Rusty and Molly somehow managed to squeeze through a gap in the barn door and raced toward the house, barking frantically. The other 4 puppies followed, their barks growing louder as they circled the property, creating an impression of many more dogs than just 6. The thieves were clearly rattled. The man nearest the barn stumbled backward, tripping over a feed bucket that clattered loudly in the night. They've got dogs, Jack heard him shout to the others. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Jack would later struggle to recall the exact sequence. Rusty and Molly made it to the back porch, scratching frantically at the door. When Jack opened it, they pushed past him and ran straight to his bedroom, barking at the window that faced the equipment shed. Meanwhile, Duke, Charlie, Hank, and Bella had the thieves surrounded, darting in and out of the shadows, their barking creating a disorienting wall of sound. One of the men swung a flashlight wildly, trying to count how many dogs were circling them. "This ain't worth it," one shouted. "Let's go." Jack stepped onto his back porch, shotgun raised. "That's right," he called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "And the sheriff's on his way." The three men scrambled toward their truck, dropping tools as they fled. Jack fired a single shot into the air, sending them into an even more panicked retreat. Their truck roared to life and sped down the driveway, gravel spraying in its wake. As the sound of the engine faded into the distance, Jack lowered his shotgun and let out a long breath. 6 puppies gathered around him, their barking now replaced with excited whines and wagging tails. "Well, I'll be damned," Jack whispered, kneeling down to their level. "You little heroes." The Pine Creek Sheriff's Department arrived 30 minutes after the thieves had fled, red and blue lights cutting through the darkness as 2 patrol cars pulled up Jack's long driveway. Sheriff Bill Thompson, Sarah's father and a lifelong resident of the county, stepped out of the lead vehicle, flashlight in hand. "Jack," he called out, approaching the porch where Jack stood with the puppies clustered around his legs. "Got here as fast as we could. You okay?" "I'm fine," Jack replied, lowering his shotgun. "They didn't get anything. Ran off when the dogs started raising hell." Sheriff Thompson's eyebrows rose as he surveyed the 6 puppies, now sitting alertly beside their owner. "These the same strays you found back in September? Don't look like much of a security system." "Appearances can be deceiving," Jack said, a note of pride in his voice. "Rusty and Molly here came and got me." He reached down to pat their heads. The others had those thieves surrounded, moving in and out of the shadows like they'd been trained for it. Deputy Garcia, who had been examining the shed area with his flashlight, called out, "Got some drop tools over here, Sheriff. Entire tracks. Looks like they were planning to clean you out, Mr. Sullivan." Sheriff Thompson jotted notes in his small pad. "Any idea who they might have been?" Jack shook his head. "Couldn't see faces. 3 men, driving a dark pickup, maybe navy blue or black. No plates that I could see. 3rd farm hit this month," the sheriff sighed. "Drought's got people desperate. Equipment prices at an all-time high." He looked thoughtfully at the puppies. "Well, seems like these little ones earned their keep tonight." As the law enforcement officers finished taking Jack's statement and collecting evidence, the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon. The puppies, their excitement finally waning, had settled into a loose circle at Jack's feet. "You know," Sheriff Thompson said as he prepared to leave, "my daughter Sarah can't stop talking about these dogs of yours." "Now I see why." Jack nodded, unsure how to respond to the unexpected comment. "Mind if I tell folks what happened here tonight? Might help other farmers be on alert," the sheriff asked. "Course not," Jack replied. "Tell whoever you need to." After the patrol cars departed, Jack led the tired puppies back to the barn. Instead of returning them to their pen, however, he found himself opening the door to the house. "Just for tonight," he told himself as the 6 dogs eagerly followed him inside. "You've earned it." In the kitchen, Jack filled a large bowl with water and watched as they took turns drinking. The rusty-colored ringleader sat at attention, looking up at Jack with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than a dog should. "Don't know what I would have lost tonight if not for you," Jack told him quietly. "Tools, equipment, things I can't afford to replace." The morning sun was just beginning to stream through the kitchen windows when Jack's phone rang. It was Sam. "Just heard from Bill Thompson what happened at your place," Sam said without preamble. "You okay?" "Fine. Nothing taken. He said those pups of yours scared off the thieves." "That true?" Jack couldn't help the small smile that formed. "It is." A pause on the line. "Well, I'll be. Guess I owe you an apology, old friend. Seems like those strays turned out to be worth something after all." By noon, Jack's phone had rung no fewer than 7 times, neighbors checking on him, expressing surprise and admiration for the puppy's actions. Even Lucille from the diner called, saying the morning customers had been talking about nothing else. Jack was repairing a section of fence. The puppies sprawled in the shade of a nearby oak tree when a familiar truck pulled into his driveway. Tom Gallagher stepped out, his usual confident stride a bit more hesitant than normal. "Sullivan," he called, approaching the fence line. "Heard you had some excitement last night." Jack straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. News travels fast. Tom's eyes drifted to the puppies, who had immediately stood at the sight of the visitor, their posture alert but not aggressive. "Sheriff says they ran off 3 men who were after your equipment." "That they did." Tom cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I might have been a bit harsh about your situation here. Those strays probably saved you $10,000 in equipment." It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Tom Gallagher, it was close enough. Jack simply nodded. "Anyway," Tom continued, "if you ever decide to breed any of them for guard dogs, I might be interested. Got some expensive machinery myself." After Tom left, Jack returned to his fence work, a strange feeling of vindication settling over him. He glanced at the 6 puppies, now playing a game of tug-of-war with an old rope. "Looks like you've changed some minds," he told them. "Mine included." The Pine Creek General Store buzzed with activity on a crisp Saturday morning in mid-December. Jack pushed his cart down the pet food aisle, adding 2 large bags of puppy chow to his already full basket of groceries. As he rounded the corner toward the register, he nearly collided with Dave Wilson, one of the farmers who had laughed at him in the diner just weeks before. "Jack, just the man I wanted to see," Dave said, his tone markedly different from their last encounter. "Heard what those pups of yours did. Pretty impressive." Jack nodded, somewhat taken aback by the friendly greeting. "They did good. My wife says those thieves hit the Johnsons' place last month. Took their new generator and a bunch of tools." Dave shook his head. Times like these, good guard dogs are worth their weight in gold. As Jack waited in line to check out, Emma Pearson waved him to the front. "Heroes discount today," she said with a wink, pointing to a Polaroid photo she'd taped beside the register. Jack with all 6 puppies, taken by Sarah during a recent visit to check on their health. "That's not necessary, Emma," Jack protested. "Oh, hush," she replied, scanning his items. "After what your dogs did, you should be getting free dog food for a year. Those same thieves broke into Peterson's hardware last week. Sheriff thinks it's a ring operating across 3 counties." Jack paid for his groceries and was loading them into his truck when Sheriff Thompson pulled up beside him. "Morning, Jack," he called through his open window. "Got a minute?" Jack nodded, closing the truck's tailgate. "Been getting calls about your dogs," the sheriff said. "Specifically, folks wanting to know if you'd consider training guard dogs for other properties." Jack leaned against his truck. "Never trained a dog in my life before these 6. Sheriff Thompson smiled. "Well, you're doing something right. Sarah says they're some of the smartest pups she's ever worked with." He paused. "Local paper wants to do a story on them. The hero hounds of Pine Creek, they're calling it." The idea of publicity made Jack uncomfortable. "Don't know about all that. Just think about it," the sheriff replied. "Might do the community some good to have a positive story. Lord knows we need it with the drought and the economy the way it is." Later that afternoon, Jack sat on his porch steps watching the puppies explore the yard. At 4 months old, they were growing into their paws, their playful antics giving way to more purposeful movements. Duke had taken to following Jack everywhere, while Bella seemed to have a natural instinct for herding, keeping the others together during play. A car appeared on the horizon, making its way up his long driveway. Jack recognized Sarah Thompson's small blue sedan. "Hope you don't mind me stopping by," she called, stepping out with a large bag. "Dad mentioned you might be getting some media attention, and I thought these might help." She handed Jack the bag, which contained 6 bright red collars. "Figured they should look the part if they're going to be famous," she said with a smile. "Not sure I want them famous," Jack admitted, examining one of the collars. "Just wanted to give them a home." Sarah sat beside him on the steps, watching as Charlie and Hank wrestled nearby. "You know, when Dad first told me you'd taken in 6 stray puppies, I thought it was a disaster waiting to happen. Most people can barely handle 1 new puppy, let alone 6. Jack chuckled. "Wasn't easy at first. Still isn't sometimes. But look at them," Sarah continued. "They're healthy, socialized, already showing protective instincts. Do you know how rare that is for dogs with their background?" She turned to face him. "You've given them more than a home, Mr. Sullivan. You've given them purpose." Before Jack could respond, a truck pulled up behind Sarah's car. It was Frank Carter, another of the farmers who had mocked him at the diner. "Sullivan," Frank called, approaching cautiously as the puppies took notice of the new arrival. "Got a minute?" Jack stood, surprised by the visit. "What can I do for you, Frank?" Frank removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "Came to apologize for how I acted at the diner. Wasn't right, making fun of you for helping these animals." He glanced at the puppies, who were watching him with alert interest. "Truth is, I was jealous. Couldn't afford to feed my own dog after the bank took my south field. Had to give him to my brother in Houston." The admission clearly cost Frank some pride. Jack extended his hand. "Water under the bridge." As Frank drove away, Sarah looked at Jack with newfound respect. "Seems like you and your pack are changing minds around here." The next few days brought a steady stream of visitors to the farm. Neighbors who had never set foot on his property stopped by with dog treats and offers of help. The local feed store owner delivered a free bale of straw for the puppies' bedding. Even Lucille from the diner arrived with her grandson Joey, who spent an hour throwing tennis balls for the enthusiastic pups. On Wednesday, the Pine Creek Gazette ran their story, "Local Farmer and Rescue Dogs Thwart Theft Ring." The article featured a photo of Jack standing proudly with his 6 dogs, quoting him on the importance of giving abandoned animals a second chance. Sam called as soon as the paper hit doorsteps. "You're a regular celebrity now?" he teased. "Hardly," Jack replied, but he couldn't deny the warm feeling that spread through him as he read the article again. That evening, as Jack sat in his living room with all 6 dogs sprawled around him, they'd graduated from the barn to the house full-time now. He picked up the framed photo of Martha from the side table. "You always said every life deserves a chance," he told her quietly. "Guess sometimes it takes a while to learn the important lessons." Duke rested his head on Jack's knee, brown eyes gazing up with complete trust, while the others dozed peacefully nearby. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, the sound a soothing backdrop to the quiet companionship that had replaced Jack's solitude. January arrived with a bitter cold front that blanketed Pine Creek in a rare dusting of snow. Jack's farm, once a quiet sanctuary at the edge of town, had become something of a local attraction. On weekends, cars would slow as they passed, passengers straining for a glimpse of the hero hounds that had made the regional news. The Pine Creek Gazette story had been picked up by a Dallas newspaper, then a state farming magazine, spreading the tale of Jack and his rescue puppies across Texas. Jack's ancient answering machine now regularly blinked with messages. Farmers seeking advice on training guard dogs, families wanting to know if the puppies would have litters in the future, and even a producer from a morning television show in Houston requesting an interview. "I don't understand it," Jack told Sam as they sat in the warmth of the farmhouse kitchen. Outside, the puppies romped in the snow, their excited barks punctuating the conversation. "They're just dogs doing what comes natural." Sam sipped his coffee. "People need good news, Jack. Economy's in the tank. Droughts killed half the crops in the county. And here you are, the grumpy old widower who saved 6 strays that turned around and saved him right back." He grinned. "It's like something from one of those Hallmark movies Martha used to watch." Jack scowled, but there wasn't any real irritation behind it. At nearly 5 months old, the puppies had transformed his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. His days now had structure beyond farm chores. Training sessions in the morning, playtime in the afternoon, and evenings by the fire with 6 warm bodies curled around his chair. "Sheriff Thompson called again," Jack said, changing the subject. "Says those thieves hit another farm in the next county over. Took 2 ATVs and a generator." "They'll slip up eventually," Sam replied. "Always do." The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Jack answered, his expression growing more serious as he listened. "That was Sarah," he said after hanging up. "She's bringing a reporter from that farming magazine out here tomorrow. Says it's a good opportunity to talk about responsible pet ownership." Sam laughed. "Look at you, local celebrity." "I didn't ask for any of this," Jack grumbled. "Maybe not," Sam conceded, "but those pups of yours might help other abandoned animals find homes. That's worth something, isn't it?" The next morning, Jack found himself unexpectedly nervous as he waited for Sarah and the reporter to arrive. He dressed in his least-worn flannel shirt and had even trimmed his beard. The puppies seemed to sense the importance of the occasion, sitting attentively as he attached their red collars. "Best behavior today," he told them, though he knew the instruction was unnecessary. Despite their young age, all 6 had developed remarkable discipline, responding to voice commands and hand signals with impressive precision. Sarah's car appeared first, followed by a sleek SUV with Texas Farm and Ranch Monthly emblazoned on its side. A woman in her 30s stepped out, camera in hand, while a man around Jack's age emerged from the passenger side. "Mr. Sullivan," Sarah called, making introductions. "This is Rebecca Chun, photographer, and Michael Davis, senior writer for the magazine." The interview began on the porch, with Jack reluctantly recounting the night of the attempted theft. As they moved to the barn to see where the puppies had originally been housed, a third vehicle rumbled up the driveway, Tom Gallagher's oversized pickup truck. Jack excused himself, walking over to meet Tom as he climbed down from the driver's seat. "Didn't know you had company," Tom said, eyeing the magazine crew. "What can I do for you, Tom?" Jack asked, noting the unusual tension in his neighbor's stance. Tom glanced toward the barn, where the reporter was now photographing the puppies. "Heard you're becoming quite the local attraction. Even got the magazines coming out now." "Not my doing," Jack replied. "They called me." Tom's jaw tightened. "Well, just wanted to give you a heads up. Been hearing some talk around town." "What kind of talk?" "That maybe this whole thing was a bit convenient. Stray puppies just happened to show up on your property. Few months later, they just happened to scare off thieves." Tom shrugged. "Some folks are wondering if maybe you staged the whole thing. Get some attention, maybe start a side business breeding guard dogs." The accusation hit Jack like a physical blow. "Who's saying that?" "Just repeating what I heard," Tom said, raising his hands in a gesture of innocence. "People talk, you know how it is." As Tom drove away, Jack stood motionless in the yard, anger and disbelief warring within him. The idea that anyone would think he'd fabricate such a story, or worse, that he'd somehow trained the puppies to respond to a staged break-in, was absurd. Yet, as he rejoined the interview, Jack found himself second-guessing how his answers might be perceived. When the reporter asked about his plans for the dogs, Jack's response was more defensive than he'd intended. "They're not for sale or breeding," he said firmly. "They're family now." After the magazine crew left, Sarah lingered behind, concern evident in her expression. "Everything okay, Mr. Sullivan? You seemed distracted during the last part of the interview." Jack hesitated, then shared Tom's insinuations. Sarah's face darkened with anger. "That's ridiculous. Anyone who's spent 5 minutes with you and these dogs knows how genuine your connection is." "Doesn't matter what's true," Jack replied wearily. "Once people start talking, then give them something else to talk about," Sarah suggested. "Show them what these dogs can really do. Not just as guard dogs, but as part of this community." As Sarah drove away, Jack contemplated her words, watching his 6 companions race across the yard in a game of their own devising. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had somehow evolved into something more complicated, bringing recognition he'd never sought and, now, suspicion he didn't deserve. Duke approached, nudging Jack's hand with his nose as if sensing his distress. The others followed, gathering around him in a protective circle. "It'll be all right," Jack told them, though the reassurance was as much for himself as for them. "We know the truth, don't we?" But as he walked back to the house, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Tom Gallagher's warning had been something else entirely, the first shots in a battle he hadn't realized he was fighting. By early February, Pine Creek was abuzz with whispers. What had started as Tom Gallagher's subtle insinuations had grown into full-blown rumors that circulated through the feed store, diner, and after-church gatherings. Jack noticed the sideways glances when he went into town, the conversations that stopped when he approached, only to resume in hushed tones once he passed. "It's getting ridiculous," Sam said as they loaded supplies into Jack's truck outside Pearson's general store. "Yesterday, I heard someone claim you hired those thieves yourself. As if you've got money for that kind of scheme." Jack slammed the tailgate closed with more force than necessary. "People can think what they want. It's that Gallagher," Sam continued. "He's always been jealous of your place. Your land's got better water access than his, even with the drought." The puppies, now 6 months old and nearly full-grown, waited patiently in the truck bed, secured with special harnesses Jack had purchased. Their presence in town had become commonplace, their dignified behavior a stark contrast to the wild rumors surrounding them. "Mr. Sullivan," a voice called from across the street. Jack turned to see Joey, Lucille's 13-year-old grandson, running toward him. "Can I pet the dogs?" "Course you can," Jack replied, his mood lightening as Joey approached. The boy had become a regular visitor to the farm, helping with small chores in exchange for time with the puppies. Mom says Mr. Gallagher told everyone at the town council meeting that you're running a scam. Joey said bluntly as he scratched behind Bella's ears. Said you probably trained the dogs to bark on command so you could pretend they scared away robbers. Jack exchanged a look with Sam. That right? Joey nodded. Nobody believed him though. Well, except Mrs. Peterson and those people who always agree with him. As they drove back to the farm, Jack's thoughts churned. He'd never cared much what people thought of him, but the idea that his integrity was being questioned, that the genuine bond he'd formed with these animals was being portrayed as some kind of con, cut deeper than he'd expected. At home, Jack found a glossy copy of Texas Farm and Ranch Monthly in his mailbox. The cover featured a striking photo of him standing on his porch, all 6 dogs arrayed at his feet, with the headline, "Second Chances: How 6 Strays Became Rural Heroes." Inside, the 8-page spread told the full story, complete with quotes from Sheriff Thompson, Sarah, and several neighbors attesting to the puppies' remarkable behavior and Jack's dedication to their care. The article ended with a thoughtful reflection on the value of rescue animals and the special bond that forms when pets and owners save each other. Jack was reading it for the second time when his phone rang. "Sullivan," he answered. "Jack, it's Bill Thompson." The sheriff's voice was tight with concern. "We need to talk. I'm heading to your place now." 20 minutes later, Sheriff Thompson's patrol car pulled up. The puppies greeted him with their usual enthusiasm, but settled immediately when Jack gave the hand signal for calm. "Impressive," Thompson noted, before his expression grew serious. "Jack, I've got a situation. Tom Gallagher filed a formal complaint yesterday. Says you're running an illegal breeding operation. Claims you never found those puppies abandoned at all, but bought them from a breeder in Houston." Jack stared at him in disbelief. "That's absurd." "I know that," Thompson assured him. "But as sheriff, I have to investigate any formal complaint. Tom's got some folks on the county commission in his pocket, and they're pressing me on this." "So what happens now?" Thompson sighed. "I need to take official statements from anyone who can corroborate your story. When you found the puppies, their condition, all of it." "Only person who saw them that first day was Sam," Jack said. "Called him right after I found them." "That's a start. And Sarah's been documenting their health since when?" "October." Jack nodded. "She's got all their medical records. Can show how undernourished they were at first." As they discussed next steps, Jack's landline rang. He excused himself to answer it, returning moments later with a puzzled expression. That was Rebecca Chun, the photographer from the magazine. Says they've been getting calls challenging the story. Someone claiming to be a concerned citizen of Pine Creek, telling them I made the whole thing up. Thompson's face darkened. "Tom's really pushing this." "But why?" Jack asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "What does he gain by tearing me down?" "Word is, he's been trying to buy up struggling properties around here. Wants to expand his operation." Thompson looked around at Jack's modest but well-maintained farm. Your place would connect his north and south pastures. Perfect for his plans. The implications were clear. If Tom could discredit Jack publicly, damage his standing in the community, perhaps even trigger an expensive legal battle over false accusations of illegal breeding, it might be enough to force Jack to sell. "So what do I do?" Jack asked, a rare note of helplessness in his voice. Sheriff Thompson considered for a moment. "Fight back. Not with accusations or arguments. That just gives oxygen to his rumors. Show people the truth instead." Later that evening, as Jack sat at his kitchen table surrounded by his dogs, he reread the magazine article, focusing on a quote from Sarah. "These dogs show what's possible when animals are given the chance to fulfill their potential. They're not just pets or working dogs. They're part of this community now." An idea began to form. Jack reached for his phone and dialed Sarah's number. "I need your help," he said when she answered. "And I think I'm going to need that community you talked about too." Over the next week, Jack, Sarah, and Sam worked quietly but purposefully. They gathered documentation, the original cardboard box the puppies had been found in, preserved in Jack's shed, veterinary records showing their poor initial condition, dated photographs tracking their growth and training progress, statements from neighbors who'd witnessed their development. Then, Jack made a decision that went against his private nature. He called Emma Pearson at the general store. "Emma, I'd like to use that community bulletin board of yours," he said. "Planning an open house at my farm. This Saturday, noon to 4. Everyone's welcome." "An open house?" Emma repeated, surprise evident in her voice. You sure about that, Jack? You've never been one for crowds. Times change, Jack replied simply. Would appreciate if you'd spread the word. On Saturday morning, Jack woke before dawn. He spent hours making sure the farm was presentable, with help from Sam, Sarah, and even young Joey. They set up a table in the yard with the magazine article, photos, and veterinary records. Sarah brought information about responsible pet ownership and the county's growing problem with abandoned animals. By 11:30, Jack was having second thoughts. Nobody's going to come, he told Sam as they stood on the porch. And if they do, they're just coming to gawk. Have a little faith, Sam replied, pointing to the road where the first vehicles were appearing. By 1 o'clock, Jack's driveway and yard held more cars and trucks than they ever had before. It seemed half the county had turned out. Families with children, elderly couples, farmers Jack had known for decades but rarely spoken to. They all wanted to meet the dogs, see their training, hear the story directly from Jack. Sheriff Thompson arrived with several deputies, making his support visible. Sarah conducted impromptu demonstrations showing how well-trained the puppies had become, explaining how their protective instincts had developed naturally, not through any special techniques. Mr. Sullivan, called a familiar voice. Jack turned to see Michael Davis, the writer from the magazine, notebook in hand. Hope you don't mind us stopping by. Wanted to see how the story was developing. Story's not changed, Jack replied. Just more people hearing it now. As the afternoon progressed, Jack found himself repeatedly telling the tale of finding the abandoned puppies, fielding questions about their training, and watching with pride as his dogs charmed every visitor with their intelligence and gentle demeanor. He was demonstrating how Duke and Bella would respond to hand signals when a hush fell over the gathering. Jack looked up to see Tom Gallagher's truck pulling in. The crowd parted as Tom approached, his expression unreadable. Quite a turnout, Sullivan, Tom said, looking around at the assembled community. Jack straightened, meeting his gaze directly. Just showing folks the truth, Tom. No secrets here. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, decades of neighborly tension hanging between them. Then, unexpectedly, Tom extended his hand. Reckon I might have been hasty in my concerns, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. These are fine animals. Credit to you. Jack hesitated, then accepted the handshake, aware of the many eyes watching this exchange. It wasn't a full apology, and he doubted Tom's sudden change of heart was entirely genuine. But in a small town like Pine Creek, such public concessions mattered. As Tom walked away to examine the display of documentation, Rebecca Chen appeared at Jack's side, camera in hand. That looked significant, she observed. Mind if I ask what that was about? Jack watched Tom speaking with Sheriff Thompson, their body language suggesting a tense but civil conversation. Just clearing the air, Jack replied. Sometimes people need to see the truth for themselves before they can accept it. By the time the last visitors departed, the February sun was setting over the Texas landscape. Jack stood on his porch, his 6 loyal companions at his feet, looking out over the fields that had been in his family for generations. Well, Sam said, joining him. I'd say that's what you call a successful defense of one's reputation. Jack nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders as he watched the final cars disappear down his driveway. Wasn't just my reputation we were defending, he said, reaching down to scratch Rusty behind the ears. It was theirs too. Spring arrived in Pine Creek with a generosity that had been absent in recent years. March rains softened the hard Texas soil, coaxing wildflowers from dormancy along fence lines and filling creek beds that had remained stubbornly dry through previous seasons. For Jack Sullivan, the changing season mirrored the transformation in his own life. The controversy stirred by Tom Gallagher had faded following the open house, replaced by a new kind of attention, more respectful, more genuine in its interest. People still drove by the farm, but now they waved rather than stared. Some stopped to chat, asking thoughtful questions about the dogs, now 7 months old and striking in their maturity. Mr. Sullivan, called a familiar voice one April morning as Jack mended a section of fence. He looked up to see Sarah Thompson's blue sedan coming up the drive, followed by another car he didn't recognize. Morning, Sarah, he replied, setting down his tools. The 6 dogs, who had been keeping him company as he worked, immediately formed a welcoming committee, tails wagging in synchronized joy. Sarah stepped out of her car, smiling at the dog's enthusiasm. "I hope you don't mind, but I've brought someone to meet you. This is Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the State Agricultural University. She runs their working dog program." A woman in her 50s emerged from the second vehicle, her practiced eye immediately assessing the dogs that approached her with curious restraint. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard quite a story about you and these remarkable animals." Jack shook her hand, his expression questioning. "What kind of program did you say?" "We train dogs for various agricultural and rural security applications," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "Search and rescue, livestock protection, even detection of plant diseases in crops. Sarah sent me the article about your dogs, and I was intrigued by their natural aptitude." Over coffee at Jack's kitchen table, Dr. Rodriguez explained her visit further. The university had received funding to expand their working dog program, with a special focus on training rescue dogs rather than purpose-bred animals. "Most people believe you need specific breeds with carefully selected bloodlines," she said, watching through the window as the 6 dogs played in the yard. "But my research suggests that rescue dogs, particularly those who've overcome adversity, often develop exceptional intelligence and problem-solving abilities." Jack listened quietly, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "What I'm proposing," Dr. Rodriguez continued, "is a partnership. We'd like to document your methods, how you've trained these dogs, how they've developed such strong protective instincts. We'd use that information to help other rescue animals reach their potential." Sarah leaned forward, her excitement evident. "And there's more, Mr. Sullivan. Dr. Rodriguez thinks your farm could become a satellite training facility." "And what now?" Jack asked, coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "A place where we could send rescue dogs for assessment and preliminary training," Dr. Rodriguez clarified. "You have a natural gift, Mr. Sullivan. These dogs trust you implicitly, and they've developed skills that many professional trainers would envy." Jack shook his head. "I'm just a farmer. Never trained a dog before these 6. "Perhaps that's why you've been so successful," Dr. Rodriguez suggested. "You approach them without preconceptions. You let them show you what they were capable of." After the visitors left, Jack sat on his porch swing, watching his dogs explore the spring landscape. Duke had taken to patrolling the property's perimeter each evening, while Bella seemed to have appointed herself guardian of the chicken coop. Charlie and Hank worked as a team during training exercises, and Molly, once the runt, had developed an uncanny ability to sense when Jack was troubled, always appearing at his side when his thoughts turned to Martha or the farm's uncertain future. Rusty, the natural leader, bounded up the porch steps and placed his head on Jack's knee, brown eyes gazing up with that peculiar intelligence that still sometimes caught Jack off guard. "What do you think, boy?" Jack asked quietly. "Think we could help other dogs like you?" His phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Sam. "Heard Rodriguez was out at your place today," Sam said without preamble. Small-town news traveled fast as ever. "Word gets around," Jack replied. "So? You going to do it? Turn your place into some kind of fancy dog academy?" Jack considered the question. "Don't know yet. Seems like a big change." "Change isn't always bad," Sam observed. "Remember how you fought getting that first smartphone? Now you're sending me weather radar screenshots every time a storm's coming." After they hung up, Jack remained on the porch, mulling over Dr. Rodriguez's proposal as twilight settled over the farm. The idea of turning part of his operation toward dog training was daunting. He'd spent 40 years growing crops and raising cattle, activities with rhythms and challenges he understood. This would be something entirely new. Yet the farm's economics had been precarious for years. The drought had forced him to reduce his herd, and grain prices barely covered production costs. The land-rich, cash-poor reality of modern family farming had been squeezing him long before 6 abandoned puppies entered his life. 3 days later, Jack called Dr. Rodriguez with his decision. By the following week, plans were in motion. The university provided funding to convert part of Jack's barn into a proper training facility, complete with obstacle courses and specialized equipment. Sarah would serve as the program's veterinary consultant, while Jack would oversee day-to-day operations, working with dogs referred by shelters across the region. "We're calling it Second Chance Working Dogs, DR," Rodriguez told him, presenting the logo she'd designed, a silhouette of a dog standing alert beside a farm scene. "The pilot program will start with 4 dogs from the county shelter, all scheduled to be euthanized before we intervened. On a warm May morning, a university van delivered the first 4 rescue dogs to the farm. They arrived frightened and uncertain. A shepherd mix with one eye, a rangy hound with scarred legs, a pit bull whose friendly disposition belied her tough appearance, and a small terrier who trembled at sudden movements. Jack's own dogs watched with curious restraint as he showed the newcomers to their temporary quarters in the renovated barn. That first day was all about letting the rescue dogs acclimate, learn that they were safe, that food would come regularly, that human hands meant comfort rather than pain. By the second week, Jack had established a routine. Mornings were for basic commands and trust building. Afternoons focused on specific skills, scent detection, obstacle navigation, response to various situations. His original 6 dogs participated in demonstrations, showing the newcomers what was possible. Word of the program spread quickly. The university published preliminary findings on the effectiveness of using rescue dogs for specialized work. Local media covered the story, focusing on the transformation of Jack's farm from a struggling cattle operation to an innovative training center. One evening in late June, Jack sat at his kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, feeding schedules, training progress reports, invoices for supplies. The financial picture was already improving. The university stipend covered program expenses with enough left over to ease the pressure on his farm operations. A knock at the door interrupted his work. Jack opened it to find Tom Gallagher standing on his porch, hat in hand. "Evening, Sullivan," Tom said, an uncharacteristic hesitancy in his manner. "Heard you've been having good luck with this dog program of yours." Jack nodded, waiting. "Got a situation?" Tom continued. "Found a dog out by my south pasture yesterday. No collar. Looks like she's been on her own a while. Tried to catch her, but she's skittish. Thought maybe you'd have some ideas." The request for help, from Tom Gallagher of all people, momentarily stunned Jack. But he simply reached for his hat. "Let me get my truck." An hour later, Jack and Tom stood at the edge of Gallagher's property, watching as Rusty and Bella slowly approached the frightened stray. Jack had brought a handful of treats and a gentle slip lead, but it was his dogs who did the real work, showing the stray through their calm behavior that humans could be trusted. "Never seen anything like it," Tom admitted as the stray finally allowed Jack to slip the lead over her head. "Those dogs of yours, there's something special." "All dogs are," Jack replied simply. "Just need someone to see it." As summer progressed, the training program expanded. 2 of the first 4 rescue dogs graduated to specialized roles. The shepherd mix went to a cattle ranch in West Texas, while the hound joined a search and rescue team. The university added funding for 6 more dogs, necessitating an expansion of the training facilities. In August, Texas Farm and Ranch Monthly returned for a follow-up story. The magazine's cover featured Jack and all 6 of his dogs standing before the new sign at the entrance to his property, Sullivan Farm and Second Chance Working Dog Training Center. On a golden evening in early September, 1 year after he'd found 6 abandoned puppies behind his barn, Jack sat on his porch with Sam and Sarah, watching as 20 rescue dogs in various stages of training explored the yard under the watchful eyes of Rusty, Duke, Bella, Charlie, Hank, and Molly. "You know what Martha would say about all this, don't you?" Sam asked, gesturing toward the thriving operation the farm had become. Jack smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "She'd say, 'I told you so.' Always wanted dogs. Always said this place was too quiet." "It's not just about the dogs, though," Sarah observed. "Look at what you've done for the community. 3 new jobs, partnerships with the shelters, visitors coming to learn about the program. You've created something important here." Jack watched as Rusty guided a nervous newcomer through a basic command sequence, the older dog's patience evident in every movement. Duke supervised the more advanced trainees in a complex scent detection exercise by the barn. Bella and Molly worked as a team with a group of intermediate dogs, demonstrating perimeter awareness protocols. "Not bad for 6 unwanted strays," Jack said quietly. As darkness fell and the training session ended for the day, Jack completed his evening routine, checking that all dogs were settled comfortably, that water bowls were filled, that the property was secure. Finally, he called his original 6 to the house. They bounded up the porch steps and through the door that remained permanently open for them now. In the living room, Jack settled into his recliner, surrounded by the dogs who had changed everything. On the mantel stood the photograph of Martha, smiling down at the scene. You were right, old girl, Jack whispered to the photograph. Sometimes the things we don't plan for end up being exactly what we need. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, nourishing the land that had supported generations of Sullivans. Inside, Jack Sullivan, no longer the solitary, struggling farmer but now the heart of a thriving community endeavor, closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that by saving 6 abandoned puppies, he had, in turn, saved himself. Please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you've watched this far, comment, "I watched all the way through," and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears in the end screen. It's very exciting.